Thought I'd give you just a quick overview of using Roll20, which is an online VTT, virtual tabletop, for playing roleplay games, and maybe other games, but certainly some roleplay games. And specifically, I want to look at it for playing Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. So I'm currently logged in as a player. I will change view in a couple of minutes to being the games master, the GM. And the player I'm logged in as is Gunnar here. So let's talk about some of the controls that are available right here. So this is the chat interface that we're seeing on the right hand side. Up towards the top we can see other buttons that bring us into other views, including settings and various different things. For the moment we'll just stay in the chat interface. We can do a couple of useful things here. We can roll a dice with no clear reason here, and it shows you instructions there on how to do it. So / or, and then what type of dice you want. And that'll give us a result here. So 94 is not a particularly good roll in Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. The lower is usually better. But that's a roll. Again, if your GM asks you to roll a dice, you can do it that way. Another way to do it is on the top left. You see the dice symbol. There's a dice roller there. And I can just do that. And actually, the other end of the spectrum, I rolled a 1 on a D100. So the basics of how you roll dice there are available. If we want to do something a little bit more, maybe nuanced, specific to a particular test, if we go into the journal here, there's some items that have been shared with the player. So the first one here is their character sheet. So I'm going to have a look at Gunnar's character sheet. So I just clicked on his name there. And this gives me a view of the character sheet. The character sheet's divided into different areas. So if we go into main here, we can see a lot of the primary kind of characteristics, some different basic skill tests, some advanced skill tests that may be available. Combat, as the name suggests, for fighting and combat, magic, and so on. So let's look at the circumstance here. So I'm going to double click Gunnar's name here, and this is going to minimize that for the moment. Here we see a map, and we only see a small portion of the map, and you'll see when we look at the GM view, this is using fog of war functionality to hide what the players are currently seeing. So when the players enter the scene, might invite Gunnar to take a perception test. Maybe he's particularly cautious and they're returning towards their camp, and it's dusk, it's dark, they can only see a select view. But he has night vision, so he's pretty good at seeing and perceiving things. So we might ask him to take a perception test, and we might make that perception test a little bit easier than average. So if we have a look down the different types of tests here, we can see that for some reason melee, it lists perception. I'm not sure that's a melee test. But if we click on perception now, it'll run us through a couple of stages. So we're going to keep this as an average test. So he has a bit of an advantage on this test. We're going to leave the target bonus and the success level bonus there. And you heard that sound. So if we go back into here, we can see 44. This was a success. Okay, so from the GM's perspective, I'd be saying, okay, you know something's amiss as you return to camp. You can hear some strange sounds of rifling and ruffling and the clang of things falling together. Okay, so this should get the players on some kind of alert. So if we return now to the GM's view, and I'll show you some of the controls the GM may offer here. So returning as GM, we'll see the same map, but this time we might get a slightly broader perspective on it. So you can still see the fog of war component, but you can see there's a couple of things going on. So the first thing I'm going to do as the GM here is I might reveal some areas and increase the view that Gunnar has. So at this point, he can see 20 yards or so in the dark, and that's probably enough to get a sense that there's something amiss in the camp. So both hearing the sounds, but now also seeing some signs that things have been left in a state that they didn't leave them in. So at this point, we can now start to think about the characters moving at certain rates. We could enter into the turn sequence if we thought that was appropriate, and the players can be. Oops, I'm still in that mode. The players can be moved around the map, so move from position to position as they go. You notice above the characters, when you click into them, you can see their wound stat. And in this instance, I've also included the advantage. So again, clicking back into the character sheet for Gunnar. This time I'm going to go into the combat side of things. If I want to increase the advantage, which is, again, plays a role in combat, you can see that advantage also increases on the visible tokens above his head. So we can keep track of that as we play through. Similarly, if the wounds are reduced, say he takes a decent hit, that updates there. It also updates in the kind of the synopsized view of the character. So if we're not clicking into them, we can still see that bit of information. So all of that's quite useful in terms of ways of controlling and doing things. As the GM, I have additional controls. So at the moment, this knife-wielding ruffian is on the GM layer. So what I can do is go into that layer, top left, and here I can push them onto the token layer. Now, as you can see, this item is still masked. The players still couldn't see them, and they wouldn't see that item if it remained in the GM layer at all. But now that it's on this layer, as the characters move closer, so say the ruffian does move around. Sorry, I'll go back into the control for that. The tokens. Say the ruffian moves around, and now that part of their base would now be visible just the way I've done the reveal. So maybe before I do that, I might hide this area behind the trees because that's not visible there. So that's been hidden off again. So Gunnar and that character may get closer. So there's some of the basic controls. The things you can do is you can share various different items with the characters. So for the characters, I've shared different handouts. So say with Gunnar, I've shared some rumors that he may have heard. And they're the basics really that you need. You can do tests from the character sheets. You can do a turn order, so I can add and remove characters from this fight. I could set just the initiative for that knife-wielding ruffian. And we can work our way through the sequence of actions that would happen, and as you click this button, it kind of moves into who's acting. So it went from Gunnar to Solundra to Ferdinand, now to the knife wielding, and then back to Gunnar. So it gives you kind of a nice way of keeping track of that as the GM. So I think they're all the main things you need to know. I mean, other functionality or controls on the camera down the bottom left. There are the ability to chat, but also send messages to specific players. So you can whisper, see the W, and that'll just send a message directly to the GM or another player, which again can be useful depending on how you're playing out the game. As the GM, I can bring out other items. So for example, if I want the characteristics for those knife-wielding ruffians, I can find them down in the NPCs here. Click on that and I have them there. In the same way I did a test for Gunnar, I could do the same idea that, say the knife-wielding ruffian gets close enough to try and use her knife to attack somebody. I can click on that. Again, that should just be a straight test. No additional bonus. And we hear that sound, it means it's gone into the chat again. So here you can see that this is quite a decent failure from the ability there. And if this was an opposed test, we could take the success levels into account there for resolving a bit of combat. So quite useful stuff for how you kind of play through and use Roll20 to play Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. So anyway, hopefully that was a little bit of use, and thanks for watching.